Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I have been monitoring that, and I've seen, I think, that interview and a couple of other places where he talked to people about this over the years. And I've always had this feeling that he was kind of, that he's kind of trapped in a kind of a rational kind of mindset, you know. And, you know, I think it is possible to make a journey into faith through reason. In fact, I think it's essential. But it's not the only part of it. You know, you also need to make that leap of faith, and that you kind of, what you were saying earlier, that you kind of need to accept that actually language is a very limited instrument for understanding these kind of concepts, and that actually you kind of need to kind of have a kind of a wordless understanding of these things, and that kind of, for me, is somewhere where faith is actually is more, you know, in that kind of wordless sense of certainty, which isn't kind of a fist clenching kind of faith, belief, a determination to believe in spite of everything, but it's a kind of a sense of ease based on something like the idea that you can't actually sit here in the middle of everything and really seriously believe in nothing. That's kind of my fundamental thing, you know, that it's not reasonable to actually be in the middle of everything and to believe in nothing. I had that conversation with my daughter years ago when she was a little girl, you know, and she got, you know, and like, what if there's nothing, Dad? You know, what if there's nothing? Because she'd heard this, and I said, well, here we are, and, you know, you're in the middle of Spain, you're in the middle of the world. Like, you, at the time, she was, I forget, maybe 12, and I said, you know, 13 years ago, you didn't exist, as far as we know, and certainly not in this dimension. And now here you are, and there's nothing but things and sounds and colors and noises and reality and life. What kind of thinking is it that would lead you to believe that this can only happen once for a short time? You know, the Mediterranean is there. You know, did you imagine that when 13 years ago, wherever you were? How then can you expect to imagine where you will be in 130 years' time? Like, so that's my kind of sense of what this is all about. It's about imagination more than it's about anything else. I don't even like the word faith, I have to say, you know, because it suggests a kind of a clinging on to something implausible. I think there's lots of evidence that God must exist. This person, I mean, God is a very loose word and ambiguous word and all that, but, you know, the thing that we would call God, it must exist for all these reasons and for others. You know, like somebody, colleagues often say to me, you know, well, you know, come on, you're an intelligent guy, and you must, you know, you understand stuff, and, you know, how can you possibly say that you believe that the Son of God came to Earth and stayed here for 33 years and, you know, died on the cross and then came back? And I said, well, sure, I mean, that's pretty implausible. I agree. I mean, I don't disagree with that. But it's not nearly as implausible as the fact that right here now, today, on whatever it is, 31st of July, 2021, I, a 66-year-old person, being called John Waters, is actually here looking out on this world. I mean, I didn't do that. I couldn't do that. I didn't make that happen. Something made that happen. And that something is what I'm interested in. Not just because it's me, but because it's everything. And I just think this is such a basic, alternative way of seeing the whole concept of the transcendent. What I'm saying is really that, as going back to Benedict and his bunker, that bunker is actually the core thing we need to focus on, because that's what's blocking out our sense, our imaginative understanding of reality in its totality.
Well, I think fundamentalist materialism, as in, you know, the view of the world that five senses, that's all there is. You know, if it can't be detected by those, it doesn't exist, even though cats and dogs can detect more light and sound than we can. And that there's this 3D world is all there is. And, you know, either side of your birth and death is a black void of nothingness. That worldview, and this is not meant to be anti-science, it's anti-scientism. That's what's brought us, I think, to where we are now. That's what's brought us to this state. And of course, not all peoples of the world have the same worldview. A lot of indigenous communities still have a very different view of creation. But it's that excessive materialism that has brought us into this mess. And what are people looking for? And you pointed this out in your recent writings. People have been looking for meaning, whether they realized it or not, even in denying meaning. And we've spoken about addiction. That in many ways it's a way of hiding from what you're here for. Just covering it up, just blocking it out. And unfortunately now we see this manifestation of a craving for meaning bubbling up in current affairs, and a lot of it is now being transferred over onto the pandemic response, which is a very unfortunate turn of events. Maybe something good can come out of that ultimately. I don't know.
I don't think so, because it's actually the wrong way around. It's actually a fear of death. I mean, it's a more enhanced fear of death. Like, what we need to do is actually, make death invisible. And I don't mean in the way in the world. I mean, that's not the point, but that we kind of, disregard this whole thing of the finality of death. I mean, even that's a hard thing to do, of course, and it's almost impossible in the culture now. But that kind of what I mean is that's what we need to do. And that was really true, I think, of when people had what people now patronizingly call a simple faith, a simple belief. People did actually see that kind of thing as like it's just a curtain you walk through, and then you just continued. And I think we need to get back to that somehow or other. The great problem, I mean, I'm going back to Peterson, and I can see what he's engaged in imaginatively, and it's very interesting. And although there's a block, I think, personally with him. I'd love to talk to him about this, but we live in a world that makes faith impossible. That's the real problem. And yet what he says is absolutely true, that in order to function fully as human beings, we need to act as if God exists. But the paradox is to see, can you really act as if, that's what he says he does. But I ask this question, can you actually act as if God exists if you're not reasonably certain that he does? See, I don't think you can. Like, in some ways you can act out ritual, and of course some societies are much better at that than we have been. We kind of abandon the ritualistic aspects of it. Like, Spain is better, for example, at that. If you're in Spain, particularly in Andalusia or those kind of more old-fashioned places, at the various feast days, like, there are massive processions through the villages and so on, and it's quite beautiful. We don't do that anymore in Ireland. It's almost gone. Corpus Christi and all that is barely recognised now in most of the towns in Ireland. But so the question is, can you actually fake it? Fake belief. That's the thing that I've written about recently in AA. You see, that's kind of what AA encourages you to do when you go in and you're an atheist or an agnostic. It encourages you to imagine God, to fake it till you make it, fake belief until you make it. And even if you can't, then to continue to sort of regard something else as the source of your being or of your power, whether it's a dead relative or something like that. And the idea is that fundamentally, there was a book written about AA in the very early stages, which is a very intriguing title, which kind of captures this. It was a German guy called Kirst. It was a kind of a biography of AA, and it was called Not God. And what it was saying was that in AA, the first and foremost lesson that you need to learn to get sober is that you are not God. That there is something else beyond you that is greater than you. Because, of course, this is the pathology of the addict. It's the kind of, they call it like the egomaniac with an inferiority complex, so there's all of those things going on. So when Peterson, I'm interested in what he's doing, and I saw those things, but I think the emotionalism is misleading because he's quite fragile yet, and he breaks down very easily. I'm not in any way disparaging that, I do that sometimes myself, and it's not a bad thing necessarily, but I can see that he's very fragile. But I would be very interested in actually talking to him, because he kind of gets lost in he talks to theologians and stuff, and that's a big mistake, because they're talking about things that are so involuted that they're not real. And it's misleading him into thinking you can construct a faith with words and images and ideas. Not really, it's got to be rooted in your imagination about how this world, you've got to look at the world and you cannot see randomness, and I can't see randomness in the world. I cannot believe that is possible.
Everywhere you look, there is patterns, repeating patterns. Like you look up fractals in nature, for example. You could go to the structure of the brain compared to the structure of the galaxy. There's umpteen examples bobbing around in popular science, and everywhere you look, I see order and chaos, but I see natural teleology. It's like there's a striving towards what I don't know, but there appears to be something's going on. That's the best word I can think of, is striving in ourselves, right down to amoeba. There's some kind of movement, forward movement.
Well, that's right. And very often this whole idea that there's some kind of divide between science and religion is completely bogus. Because, modern science grew out of Christianity, first of all. And secondly, when they do that, what they do is they only show you or allow you to see or hear from a select group of scientists. There are scientists out there who can actually bring religion and science together very well. Somebody like Rupert Sheldrake, for example. But you don't hear much of their kind of marginal figures, and they're kind of regarded as some sort of eccentric. But Sheldrake is a brilliant scientist, apart from the fact that he actually understands. He believes in the transcendent idea and lots of related concepts. And so this is all, of course, part of the dumbing down of society, which we can see with kind of to an extraordinary extent now in the last 18 months. That young people in particular, they're actually really dumbed down. And I don't think it's coincidental that they're the first generation in a long time in Western Hemisphere, really, and particularly I know in Ireland, looking at them very microscopically, that have had no religious training in any way, sense or form. They just don't have any religious imagination whatsoever, any transcendent imagination. They sneer at it, and that they think that makes them clever. They think that makes them cleverer than Rupert Sheldrake, which is absurd.
I'll recommend to listeners they check out Rupert's book, Science and Spiritual Practices, where he brings these worlds together, through the lens of his own life. And I also did an interview with him around that. So if they want a quick version, they could check that out. Well, speaking as someone who is not religious, one of the things that's really struck me, I was reminded of it in your comments about young people and religious training, is the churches in general. I can't speak for every church all around the world, but certainly thinking about the UK and Ireland, the response of the church, or lack of response to the church from the pandemic situation and lockdown, it just, this strange silence. Maybe you can throw a bit of light on the situation in Ireland, but certainly here in England, with the Church of England, it's been just nothing but perfunctory things to say about it, really. Just, the usual, no surprises, no inspiration, nothing really to assist, a congregation in navigating these tumultuous times. And, of course, we saw closed doors as well. For some people, the pandemic situation was so extreme that it pushed them to do something they maybe hadn't done for a very long time, which is go to a church to seek something, just as a space to be. And in many cases are met with closed doors. So it's all been, when the church is required to step up, they seem to have stepped down.
Yeah, it's been, of course, a very extraordinary thing, and I can't say that I understand it completely. I mean, I was astonished by it because I started encountering it fairly on in communications with certain priests that I knew and people like that, and watching and hearing stories, and then even as recently as yesterday, a woman told me about where she rang a priest looking for confession. She had been a recent convert back to Catholicism, and he basically bawled her out of it. He said that she could do her own confession. He told her which is completely news to me. Because of the pandemic, it seems, but the first inclination I had was that, like a priest I knew in America, and who was a really fundamentalist kind of guy, and what other people would call a traditionalist and right wing and all that. Basically, was hiding away, and when I kind of said this is a bit of a scam, and he was really outraged at the idea. And that there would be any expectation that he would actually have to go out and do sick calls, like it was like anathema to him, and he was just not doing it. And that kind of was borne out then when you saw the way the church was behaving, closing its churches, like in no argument, no discussion, no masses, no Eucharist, no nothing. And not alone that, but then they allowed thousands of people to die alone without the sacraments. Like, this is shameful to carry on. And I mean, one of the things that seems clear is that they took absolutely literally from word go. You see, this is the amazing thing to me, that a church which is there to kind of challenge the world, which is, supposed to be, under the leadership of Satan, right? This is the world. And they go by the logic of the world all the time. They watch TV to find out what's true. Well, I just find this fantastic. You're supposed to, like, part of what you do as a priest, for example, is that you're a leader of the flock. Therefore, you have to think through everything. And you think about, and you must think the unthinkable. But they weren't thinking anything, least of all the unthinkable. So I just find this absolutely mind-boggling. And now we see in Ireland, certainly, and I think maybe less so in Britain, actually. Interesting, I saw a thing where there was something like 1,200 bishops came out, or prelates came out recently against the vaccination mandates and all that. But in Ireland, the priests are essentially urging their congregations to take the vaccine, which is again preposterous, and it's all based on this, predicated on this extraordinary idea that there's a massive pandemic going on, when in fact there is zero evidence for any pandemic other than what's on the news.